Into the very first front office. I'm Tony Lombardi with Russell Street Report, and I'm joined by Brian McFarland, our capologist on Russell Street Report. Brian, how are you?
Good. How are you today, Tony?
Good, thanks. The Ravens sure don't give us, they sure do give us a lot of things to talk about these days, and a lot of injuries happening out there, one winning drive. And let's talk about some of those injuries and some of the guys the Ravens got to replace the guys that went down for the season. So let's talk a little bit about, I know there's a lot of discussion going on about the Ravens, how they practice, how they train, the field that they're on, the shoes that they wear. What are your thoughts on some of these skill position players going down so frequently?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it's just football. The latest two injuries were non-contact, and they're tendon injuries. So it's not muscular things like that. I mean, tendons, unfortunately, are tendons, and you can strengthen the muscles around them. But if you twist it the wrong way, we've always heard, stories about, guys picking up their child or slipping on something and, on the steps and, blowing their knee out or things like that. So unfortunately, it's life. It's, and I guess because everything's strung together in the last couple of weeks that becomes a big topic, but unfortunately it is what it is, and they're gonna have to find a way to deal with it.
Yeah, and one of the ways they're dealing with is by bringing in some new players, and those players include Cannon, who's a special teams guy to kind of fill in for Justice Hill, and they brought in obviously Le'Veon Bell and Devonta Freeman, and of course Latavius Murray. Let's talk about those acquisitions. How do you think they're going to actually work out for the Ravens? I know it's too early to tell to be certain, but let's talk about how they might impact the Ravens game on Monday night against the Raiders, and also talk about how they fit into the cap.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way they've signed them indicates how they feel about them too. Obviously, Cannon's the special teams guy, kind of replaces Justice Hill. Whether he'll be active or not, I guess, remains to be seen. Murray sounds like, and obviously he just came right out of the Saints camp. So he seems like he's going to be, obviously he's on the 53, so he's going to be active and probably see time, split time with Williams. So, and then the other two are on the practice squad. Obviously Bell hasn't been in camp, so he's going to have to work his way into shape. He's kind of like Des Bryant last year, where they signed him, and they gave him a couple of weeks to get up to speed. So I think he's going to be maybe a couple of weeks now that they have some, he was the first guy they signed really. So it looked like he was going to have to be rushed in, but and then Freeman, we'll see. I mean, I think he's just there to, be the third back if they need somebody, if God forbid they lose another one. So cap wise, Cannon's only a 3-year veteran. So if they release him next week, there's no financial repercussions beyond that, cap repercussions. Murray is a vested veteran, but obviously he's, the intention is for him to be here all year. The other two, when they bring them up, just being elevated from the practice squad does not trigger that termination pay. I mean, when we talk about guaranteed salary for the year, that's really called termination pay. And that means that if they're on the roster week 1, the game day 53-man roster, I should say, then they're entitled to termination pay if they're cut, which is the balance of their salary. So those two, if they're just, I shouldn't say those two because I don't think Bell's coming up. But if Freeman comes up, that will trigger that. And then if he comes up, if either of the two come up or added to the 53 in the future, they get a lesser termination pay, which would be 25% of their salary. But generally, I mean, with 18 games, so if they're up for 4 or 5 games, that would cover that termination pay. So that amount. So financially, obviously they had to work some cap magic with restructures, but that's none of these deals are earth shattering. And certainly the way they've set them up, I guess we'll say they've protected themselves the best they can.
So let's talk about those briefly, the restructures. I know about probably less than a week ago, Brian, you posted that the Ravens were right around $1 million, maybe a little bit less in cap space, and that you expected some restructures to happen. They did Stanley a few weeks back, and now they've got Tucker and Chuck Clark, and they could still do Marlon Humphrey if they wanted to.
Yeah, they have. I mean, I've been saying actually since March that they were probably going to have to do restructures. I tried to create a chart that was on the site and I put on Twitter about what I call the effective cap space, which is what they really have, not the number that you hear bandied about, but when you factor in practice squad and the rule of 51 ending, so you're adding at least 2 guys to the cap to get to 53, and now unfortunately they've added 12 or 13 because of IR. So restructures were going to happen. They still have Humphrey, gives them a little over 2 million. They could do Marcus Peters. They did him in the spring, but didn't do a max. Now his injury complicates that because he's only got 1 year left, and you're building on his cap number next year. And if they restructure him, but that's another 2 mil. And then there's a couple other guys. They would have to add void years, but they could get about $1 million each from Elliott and somebody else was Bozeman. And that's really all they got. I mean, but if they need it, they can get it. But that they've avoided void years, and void years just add extra years on to the deal. Both of those guys are only under contract for this year, but that allows them to spread that bonus, that conversion from base salary to bonus out over. Right now, it would just be, you can't because it's just this year. So you would have to add years, and that spreads it out, which creates more cap savings this year. They've avoided doing that. Obviously, they've done restructures, which is pushing it into the future. They're in decent shape next year, but as we saw this year, 25 million in cap space sounds great, but it doesn't mean as much as it used to.
Now let's talk about the 4 additions and just what their cap impact is for 2021. Right now, Freeman and Bell are assigned to the practice squad. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those guys get paid $14,000 per week, right?
Yes, because they're veterans. They get a higher amount. The guys who are, undrafted free agents from this year, rookies, they get $9,200 per week.
If either is elevated to the 53, then what happens?
Then they get a 1 week salary. So that 14,000 is replaced by basically a 1/18. I'm used to 17ths, but they added that game on us. So 1/18 of what would be the applicable veteran minimum for them. So that's for both of them is 1.075 mil. So that's it's about 59,000. So that 59,000 would replace the 14,000 for that week. Elevated the next week, same thing. And then, of course, after being elevated twice, you have to be added to the 53 or stay on the practice squad.
Now, Murray is a different situation. He's on the 53, and his situation is a little bit more expensive than the other 2 guys.
Yeah, his veteran, he also has the veteran, according to reports, he received a veteran minimum of 1.075 mil, or at least it said the minimum salary, and that would be his applicable salary. The report also said he had what would amount to another mil or so in incentives. My guess would be, and we obviously haven't seen any numbers on it yet, but my guess would be those would be what we call not likely to be earned incentives, which would mean they do not count on the cap this year, but if earned would count on next year's cap. And the delineation there is for it to be not likely would be it's a statistical category that he did not reach last year. So I think he had around 600 yards rushing last year, I think. So so using that number, if the incentive was 601, since he didn't reach that last year, it would be, if he goes over that, then he earns his incentive, but that keeps it not likely to be earned because he didn't reach that threshold last year. If the incentive was 599 and he had 600 last year, that would be likely to be earned, and that would count on this year's cap. So based on just their lack of cap space, I would have to think those thresholds make them not likely to be earned.
I've been asked why the Ravens didn't go after Murray to begin with and went after a guy like Bell, but I always tell them that, when they went after Bell, Gus Edwards was still healthy, and Gus Edwards has a similar running style to Latavius Murray. So that may have had something to do with it. Expenses had something to do with it as well, but the Ravens just had to bite the bullet and get this guy because they needed someone like that to complement the running game. And he's a guy I think is a lot like Gus Edwards. But I also think it says something, Brian, about the Ravens organization, because guys like Justin Houston, Latavius Murray, it seems to me that they're accepting below market value offers to play with the Ravens.
I mean, I think you're right. And in Murray's case, obviously things broke really well for him. He probably could have gotten more somewhere else, but he's probably getting the best opportunity here. I do think the Ravens, I think he may have still been on the Ravens' radar. They obviously needed somebody sooner, perhaps, and Freeman might have been signed as well. But I think they would have preferred, because of the guaranteed salary, because of that termination pay issue. I think they would have preferred to sign Murray next week,
right
after week one, or sign him to the practice squad, which he probably wouldn't have done for a week. But obviously, once Edward went down, the necessity was there.
Rock Spring Financial Group is the premier local Maryland mortgage brokerage firm. They are known for the hometown feel with a customer experience level that is unrivaled. They specialize in all home loan types, whether it's conventional, FHA, VA, and debt consolidation. Rock Spring covers it all. So when you're tired of issues with online mortgage shopping and want the human touch, look no further than Rock Spring Financial Group, LLC. Give Rick Metzger a call or visit them at rockspringfinancial.com.